It is time for my first Bubble Watch video. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? It's me again, Golden Blue Dude, and if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. What I do is videos every single day, either college football or college basketball, and the best way to support this channel and get more of my content is hit the subscribe button. This is actually my first ever Bubble Watch video. Now, I put out my 48 team brackets video. I updated that yesterday. These are the teams that barely didn't make my cut. Doesn't mean they won't make it into the big dance, but they didn't make my cut. This is going to be the first tier of bubble teams, and the first tier are more likely to get in the big dance. I'm not really sure how many tiers I'm going to do, but I do know that in tier 1 there's going to be 12 teams. What I'm going to do is show you their resumes to prove to you it's not as easy as it seems. We'll look at wins and losses, their biggest wins, and their worst losses, and their current streak. So please leave in the comments who you think out of this group should be in and who should be out. And oh yeah, you can only pick 3 to get in. First up, UConn. They are 6th in the Big East. Not a good start. They're 8-5, and they really only have one big win, but it's a pretty good win at USC. USC is 15-3, and they just got ranked. Pretty good win, but their worst loss, and really there's only one bad loss for them, and that's at Providence, who's 10-10. By the way, you'll see Providence more than once on this list as far as a bad loss. For some reason, they're good at upsetting teams. UConn has had COVID issues, so I try to take that into consideration. The problem is they've lost 3 out of their last 4, and their only win is against a Butler team who's 7-10. Not good. Next up is going to be Davidson. They're 3rd in the A10. It's not bad. They're 10-5. Their best wins, well, there's only one of them. Georgia Southern. I mean, Georgia Southern is 12-9, but that's not a great win. That's the only good win that they have. They do have 2 bad losses too, at Providence, 10-10, and a home game against Charlotte, 9-10. So they have a better record than UConn, but not as good of a good win, and one more bad loss. But they're on a 4-game win streak. That one's tough to judge, guys. Well, I'm going to throw more on you. Next up, Richmond. They're 5th in the A10. Well, you're like, well, Davidson's 3rd, so this should be easy. Yeah, keep telling yourself that. Richmond is 10-4. Their biggest wins at Loyola Chicago, who is 17-3 and just got ranked. That's a pretty good win. But they also beat, wait for it, Davidson, who I just talked about, who's 10-5. So yeah, that's a good win. Not as easy as you thought. See? One bad loss, and that was Hofstra, who's 12-7. So that's really not a terrible loss, and that's their worst loss. They've had COVID issues, and they've won 3 out of their last 4. Their only loss was to Loyola Chicago. Yeah, they played them twice. Beat them once, lost to them once. So that's not bad. Not a bad resume for Richmond. Let's keep it going with TCU, who's 7th in the Big 12. They're 11-7. Here's their biggest wins. They have 3, but 2 of them are the same team. The first one, Liberty, they're 15-5, and they are in my tournament. The next team, Oklahoma State, swept them, who's 12-6. Also in my brackets. One bad loss, and guess who it's against? You guessed it, Providence, who's 10-10. Kind of wishy-washy though. They won 2 and they've lost 2 in their last 4 games. Tough to figure TCU out. Next up is going to be Syracuse. They're also 7th in their league. 7th in the ACC. They're 11-7. Biggest wins, I guess a decent win against Buffalo. They're 8-6. I don't know. And then a pretty good win against Virginia Tech, who's 14-4. Bad losses? Not really any terrible losses. I mean, they did lose to Pitt twice, but Pitt's 9-6, so that's not horrific. They've won 4 out of their last 6. Those 2 losses was at Virginia, who's 14-3, and at Clemson, who's 12-5. So they don't have any bad losses. They just can't beat a lot of good teams. The only one they've beaten is Virginia Tech. So they get beat, but not by bad teams. Next up, going to be Florida. They're 5th in the SEC. They're 10-5. They've got some good wins. Army, who's 9-4. LSU, who's 12-6. Tennessee, who's 14-4. in my brackets. And my team, West Virginia, who's 14-5, also in my brackets. But they also have some bad losses. A home loss to a Kentucky team who's 5-13. That's probably the worst loss I've seen on here so far. They also lost at Mississippi State, who's 11-10. So they're one game over 500. That's not a terrible loss. And then their latest loss, a home loss against South Carolina, who's 5-8. Current streak, they've won 4 out of their last 5. In that streak, that is when they beat Tennessee, and that is when they beat West Virginia. But it's also when they grabbed one of their worst losses in South Carolina. How do you figure Florida out? I don't know. Next up is going to be Minnesota, 9th in the Big Ten. You're like, why are they on this list? You'll see, you'll see. Their record is 12-7. Biggest wins. They have a lot of good wins, guys. A lot. A home win against St. Louis, who's 9-3, in my brackets. A home win against Iowa, who's 14-6, in my brackets. A home win against Ohio State, who's 16-4. High seed in my brackets. And a big win against Michigan at home, who's a number 1 seed in my brackets. Bad losses, really only one against Maryland, who's 10-10, so that's not even a horrific loss. So the record isn't great. They're 9th in the Big Ten, but they have all these great wins and only one bad loss. Current streak, though, they've lost 3 out of their last 4, and their only win against Nebraska. Minnesota needs to get hot if they want to get into the big dance. Next up, very interesting team. North Carolina, 4th in the ACC. They're 12-6, but their biggest win is against Syracuse, who's 11-6. Bad loss? Really only one kind of bad loss, and that was against NC State, who's 8-8. They've won 4 out of their last 5, and their only loss was at Clemson, who's in my bracket. So, only one halfway decent win, and only one kind of bad loss. They beat the bad teams, but lose to the good teams. You're on a decent streak. I don't know, guys. I'll leave it up to you. Next up on the list, St. John's, 5th in the Big East. They are 13-8. Biggest wins. They got a home win against UConn, who's 8-4. Also on this bubble watch. And they got a big home win against Villanova, who's a 1 seed in my brackets. Bad losses? Well, they lost at Georgetown, who's 5-10, a home game against Marquette, who's 9-11, and a road game at Butler, who's 7-10. But they're on a pretty good streak right now. They've won 6 out of their last 7, and their only loss was that bad loss to Butler. Only 3 more to go, guys. Hang on. Next up, going to be St. Louis. They're 8th in the A10. Bad start, but they've had massive COVID issues, and their record is 9-3. They don't sound bad. Biggest wins? Just 1. Against LSU, who's 12-6. Bad loss, really just 1 against LaSalle, who's 8-12. So not a great win, not a terrible loss. And they've won 2 out of their last 3, but that one loss was their worst loss against LaSalle. I'm telling you guys, it's tough. It is tough. Next up, SMU. They're 4th in the AAC. They've also had COVID issues. They're 11-4. Biggest wins at Dayton, who's 11-6. And then a home win against Memphis, who's 12-6. Bad loss? Just 1. Cincinnati, who's 5-7. Current streak, they've won 3 out of their last 4, and their only loss was to Houston, who is a very high seed in my brackets. Here's the last team on this particular tier. LSU, they're 4th in the SEC, and they're 12-6. Biggest win? Well, they got a decent win against Georgia, who's 12-7, and they got a pretty good win against Arkansas, who's 15-5, and they're in my brackets. Their bad loss, just 1, but it's a bad one, at Kentucky, who's 5-13. And their current streak, they've lost 2 out of their last 3, and their only win was against Mississippi State, who's 11-10. All right, guys, that's it for tier number 1. I'll be back with tier number 2. I'm not sure what day I'm going to do it on, but I'll have that out by the end of the week. Let me know who you think out of this tier. Y'all let me know which teams out of this tier you think deserves to be in the big dance and who deserves to not be in the big dance. You can only pick 3. That's my rules. Good luck. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you on my next show.